Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by my friend, Stephen Newman, technical writer during the day. And really, with a lot of his free time, he's also a sports writer for DullasDistrict.com, Virginia Tech class of 2018. And like me, a fellow DC sports fan, and especially a big Nationals fan. Stephen, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me back on, Billy.
Well, yeah, I had to have you back on, of course, to talk about Juan Soto getting traded to the Padres, the face of the franchise for the Nationals for so many years. And so we felt like we had to do a special podcast just on that and the trade deadline. But first, before we get to that, I think we had to talk about really the big news that transcended the baseball world, and that is legendary Dodgers announcer Vin Scully, who was the voice of the team for 67 years, started in 1950, retired in 2016. He passed away at the age of 94 a couple nights ago, and certainly was sad, of course, to see him pass, but definitely a celebration of his life, given that he was 94 years old as well. Stephen, what are kind of your thoughts on his passing? Of course, really everybody who is a baseball fan has some connection, seems like, to Vin Scully.
Yeah, so many great moments. You don't have to be a Dodger fan to know just what Vin Scully meant. I mean, you could certainly speak to it as someone that aspired into like sports broadcasting, PA announcing. But for me as well, just as a sports writer, reporter back in college, it's he's obviously a legend. He's one of the all-time greats, and it's as weird as it is, given he's 94 years old. You know, at a certain point, the time comes, it still hits hard. Like it feels like he's gone too soon. But obviously, like I said, so many moments, calling so many big games. Just the way that his storytelling in a game, as while just both talking through the course of events throughout the game. It's so many. I could go on and on. The countless lines that he had, stories he told throughout a game. One that I actually I heard, it's on a podcast, I forgot what it would have been, but it was the Johnny Gomes story. I don't know if you remember yeah, just so many. He's, like I said, just a legend of the game. Someone that even players I've heard getting to meet him. It's even for them, it's just one of those starstruck moments. Yeah, it's definitely a sad moment. And it's interesting you bring this up before we even get into anything about the trade deadline. It happened about the same time, yet this almost feels bigger. Yeah, it's a shame, but he'll always be remembered as a great sports reporter, PA announcer.
Yeah, for me, I mean, like you talked about it, like I think a lot of guys like me who wanted to get into play-by-play broadcasting really took inspiration from Vin Scully. I don't know if you knew this, but actually back in high school, when Facebook was popular, even Twitter was coming on, my Facebook name was actually Billy Scully. So for really most of my high school career, I was also the PA announcer for some of our sports teams. People didn't even know my actual last name was Parvatam. They just assumed it was Scully. So people would always say, "Oh, what's up, Billy Scully? What's up, Billy Scully?" So that, that's just kind of funny. But that just shows you just how much inspiration I took from him, and really just kind of reading about all the consequential calls he was a part of. I mean, Kirk Gibson's 1988 World Series home run, Hank Aaron breaking Babe Ruth's record. You had in football in the NFL, he called Joe Montana to Dwight Clark the catch in football. Perfect games and no hitters. I mean, he was just incredible. And then you just read about just the type of person he was away from the booth, how he mentored the young broadcasters, really gave them advice. I mean, like you mentioned, it is a sad day that when he passed, but certainly at 94 years old, he lived a full life. So obviously, like you talked about, you don't have to be a Dodger fan to be a fan of Vin Scully, and certainly he was an inspiration to me. So obviously we had to give him a shout out there. But let's transition now, Stephen, to why we originally wanted to have this podcast, to talk about the deal that not only shook up Nationals fans, but really the whole baseball world. Juan Soto, the young phenom, 23 years old, was traded away from the Nationals to the Padres. People really, I would say for the most part, probably thought it was going to happen. Now, when it actually happened, it was still a shock. But after Juan Soto, right before the All-Star game, turned down the 15-year, $444 million deal, which, by the way, would have made him the highest paid player in MLB history. Mike Rizzo and the front office decided to look for options, and they finally settled on the Padres. I know there were teams like the Cardinals in the mix and the Dodgers, maybe even the Yankees were a longer shot, but they finally traded him to the Padres on deadline day. They ended up trading him for C.J. Abrams, Mackenzie Gore, Robert Hassel, James Wood, Jarlin Susana, and Major Leaguer Luke Voigt, who, by the way, I just got a notification hit an RBI single in tonight's game, so he's already off to a good start. So basically the gist of it was one of the best young players who right now at least is on track for a Hall of Fame career, traded for a bunch of prospects. The second year in a row, the Nationals decided to sell at the deadline, and certainly showing you that they are in the rebuilding phase. But I guess my first question to you, Stephen, was what was your immediate reaction to this trade? I mean, I know you thought it was going to happen, but to see it happen, like I just mentioned, certainly was shocking to say the least, once it actually hit.
Yeah. For me, the most surprising thing about it probably because I kind of had a feeling it was going to happen to the Padres. There were other teams in there, like you said, like the Cardinals, Dodgers in particular, where I think they're the three finalists. The most surprising thing to me, I think, at the time, was that they lumped Josh Bell in with him. You knew that if they trade away Soto, they'd get a lot back. You add in a guy like Josh Bell. I think I go back and forth on it, but I actually think that that's something that it got them a better return, I think, but also maybe getting one, maybe even two more like truly impactful prospects. That's something I know a lot of people have thought maybe that's taking like the easy way out, do them both at once. So you don't have to make another trade. You don't have to talk with another team. I kind of push back on that. I think that it helps you, like I said, get another impactful prospect or two, as opposed to just a throw in that maybe doesn't become much of anything. But my initial reaction to your point was not super shocked, just because I kind of saw it coming, but it was definitely in a different way, obviously, than Vin Scully. But it was a sad moment to see yet another one of the team you love stars get away for whatever reason. But life goes on. I think in the long run, we'll probably get to it. I think that this does help the Nationals rebuild probably quicker than they otherwise would have, especially if you would have had to have paid Soto, and maybe there'd be some budgetary issues with that down the road. So I think they did relatively well, but we'll see in due time, obviously, because it's at the end of the day, it's their prospects. You don't know, but
yeah, people were saying, this might be the biggest trade in baseball history when you talk about how young Juan Soto is, and the team that's getting him, the Padres, is getting him for 3 postseason runs potentially before they have to make a decision whether or not they're going to assign him, or maybe they may trade him before that. But I guess my question to you, big picture, because this is a question that I've been getting from friends who are following the team, or maybe not following it as closely as me and you do, but how does the farm system look now that we've gotten all these prospects? And again, you look at last year when the Nats traded Scherzer and Turner to the Dodgers, got prospects. Obviously, you got Josiah Gray and Keibert Ruiz in the big leagues now. But I think kind of the casual Nats fans are asking, is our farm system actually good now that we've given away all this talent and gotten all these prospects in return? I mean, I read your article in preparation for this podcast, which, by the way, everyone should go and read it. It does a good job breaking down the deadline and the Soto trade. It's called Preller Proves to be Rizzo's Padre at the trade deadline. It's a nice play on words there. But you said, depending on Susana, the Nats farm system could actually jump to number 5 in the big leagues, which is pretty good considering it seemed like last couple of years they were ranked among the lowest, if not dead last, in farm system. Part of me and maybe some of the casual fans may ask, is that still too low given that, man, they just traded away Juan Soto and they traded away Scherzer and Turner last year? Or all being said, you're pleased with where the farm system is at, and that's probably about where they should be ranked?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. So just for some additional perspective, because it's been for years, the farm system had been a major issue for the Nationals for various reasons, whether it's they just hadn't drafted well, developed players all that great. And some of it's just from trading prospects away to because they were contenders. They're trying to win it all every year, and part of that is giving away some of your best talent. But so entering the trade deadline last year, depending on where you looked, they're anywhere between like worst and third from the bottom in the league, something like that. Fast forward to this year. So entering the season, they were 24th, I believe, according to Fangraphs. And that's with guys, obviously, like Josiah Gray, Keibert Ruiz, like you said, recently graduated from prospect status. So there's a little bit of, if you consider them as closer to prospects, that obviously moves them up a bit. But officially, they were 24th, according to Fangraphs. With this trade, it bumps them up to 8th. And like you said, if you would have included, I think it's Mackenzie Gore, who had recently graduated from prospect list, they would have been 5th. And that's also with CJ Abrams, who they got in the deal, who had been a top 10, I believe, overall prospect in the league. That's not including him either. And he's only played 40 or so games in the big leagues. You factor him in, you're talking probably around 3rd or so. So, I mean, that's obviously, that's huge. Like that's one of the best farm systems in the league. And there's some really good ones out there. Right up the road, even the Orioles. Theirs is right up there too. They we'll get into it too when we start talking about the league at large and where things are trending. The Orioles are definitely trending big time in the right direction, and that's actually to be competing kind of with them. In that sense, you started to wonder if the way the Nationals were going, if they'd kind of become, I don't want to say second fiddle to the Orioles, but they were running that risk a little bit. So to beef up the farm system and kind of improve your future outlook in that way, I think it goes a long way. Even with the World Series in 2019, things were looking pretty bleak for the Nats. But now, as much as again it hurts for Soto to go, they definitely improved in terms of young talent in a major way.
So all that being said, do you think obviously you mentioned earlier adding Josh Bell to the trade with the Padres probably bumped up in terms of value, in terms of the prospects you're getting. So are you satisfied with the trade? Do you think, I mean, obviously again, immediately you're not going to get, and really maybe ever, you're not going to get the equal value back for a guy like Juan Soto, but given the situation, do you think they got the best possible trade? Do you think the Padres were still the best possible partner to make this trade with?
I think they did mighty well. So just for some kind of background here on the players that they got back. Mackenzie Gore, I believe in 2017 was the number 3 overall pick in the draft. 2019, CJ Abrams was the 6th pick in the draft. Robert Hassel in 2020 was the 8th. And James Wood, the big potential major slugger outfielder that they got as well. He was a 2nd round pick. And I actually saw too that they paid over slot to get him. So that's a borderline 1st round pick too. So you're talking essentially 4 1st round talents. A guy on off the international market that I saw, Jim Bowden, I believe it was, projected that once prospects kind of get re-ranked, which they tend to do right around now, he'll be flirting with, if not in the top 30 prospects, probably in all of baseball. So, and it's not like any of these guys have underperformed either. They've lived up to their draft positions. So I know that none of them, the immediate reaction when you see names is that, okay, these guys should be good. You don't know for sure. And I highly doubt any of them are going to ever be Juan Soto. So, and obviously, say, for example, they made a deal with like the Dodgers and you get a guy like Gavin Lux. Everybody loves Gavin Lux. Gavin Lux is a highly productive player. You kind of know what you're getting. Whereas when it's all minor leaguers with minimal, if any, major league experience, you don't know. But to me, I think they did really well. Like I said, it's essentially 4 1st round talents plus an international guy, similar to obviously a pitcher, not a hitter, but it's what Juan Soto was. So yeah, I think they did really well. The next step, obviously, given that most of them are low-level minor leaguers, is obviously developing them in the minor leagues. But just in terms of the value of the players, just at face value, I think they did really well.
And do you like the addition of Luke Voigt in the trade instead of Eric Hosmer? Eric Hosmer was actually supposed to be included in the trade, but he had a no trade clause, and Washington was one of the 10 teams that he did not want to be traded to. So instead, Luke Voigt was added. I think it's better. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he's younger. I think he had some promise on the Yankees as well before they ended up trading for Rizzo, so he had to be shipped out of there. But he's also under club control, if I'm not mistaken, until 2024. So he could work out, or they may end up trading him as well to get some prospects later on in a future season. But I would say I also like the fact that they traded for Luke Voigt instead of getting Eric Hosmer, who also had a bad contract.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And he is under club control through 2024. So you're getting 2 more full seasons of him. And I also agree that I feel like regardless of how it goes, just because of kind of his age, and I think he'll have good trade value too. So I would probably be looking, I don't know if it's next year or you get into 24, just based on the team's timeline. I think that's someone you'll be probably looking to trade. But to your original question, I definitely do prefer Voigt to Eric Hosmer. I think they're not all too different value-wise as players, but once you factor in particular, Hosmer's contract is huge. Now, the original reports I'd seen was that the Nationals would pay before he obviously nixed the trade because he had them on his no trade clause. But they were talking about the Nationals paying his contract for the rest of this year, and then the Padres picking up, I think it's his last 3 years that he had, which that was that would have been a huge favor from the Padres. What I was honestly hoping at the time, before everything became official and we knew whether or not Hosmer would actually accept, was that maybe including Hosmer would get the Nationals another prospect, just because obviously that's what they're really in it for. But either way, one of the bigger things to me, just because obviously you're losing Josh Bell, is that the Nationals, granted, it didn't have to be a guy that was gonna be the long-term solution, but they did need something at first base. Shout out to Joey Meneses for so far so good. Hit his first major league home run a couple nights ago. But they needed something to at least fill that position, which is obviously why it came down to like Hosmer or Voigt. But given the choice, Voigt is definitely the better player, better value at the contract. He, in 2020, the shortened season, I believe led the league in home runs. I saw. So you hope he can bounce back a little bit, but he's a solid hitter and someone that I think down the road, like I said, that's someone that you could trade and not get any of these types of prospects back for, but something of value long term that'll help once the Nationals competitive window opens again.
So I guess, talking about that, how should Nats fans feel about the state of the franchise? I mean, you've seen a lot of frustrated fans, especially on Twitter, talk about the fact that they traded Max Scherzer and Trey Turner away last year. Soto this year, they let Rendon go after the World Series. And I think the thing that I think frustrates a lot of people is the fact that, they were saying, we're letting these guys go, we're trading them, but ultimately we're building up for Juan Soto. He's going to be the guy we actually re-sign and build around. I think for me, my take would be, you can't blame the team. Once Juan Soto turned down the 15-year, $444 million deal, I think it was pretty obvious that it was a really good chance he was not going to re-sign. Scott Boras likes his guys to test the free agent market, and I don't think that they were going to pay him $500 million. So that's number one. They basically had no choice but to trade him. And if you traded him now, you were going to get the most value. I think you would probably agree they weren't going to get this type of deal with all these high-end prospects if they waited a year from now or 2 years from now when they had less team control. The team that was trading for him had less team control over him. And look, it's hard to be good for 10 seasons. I mean, both you and I remember, 2008, 2009, when the Nats were losing 100 games a year. It's kind of funny. I guess people in high school now probably don't remember that. They just remember the good 10-year run they had. But from 2012 to 2021, I mean, they were right in the mix of the playoffs. So it's just hard to be good for that long. And we were texting about this earlier. Like, look at the super teams that are assembled. They never win. I mean, really, the only team you could say is the Dodgers. But even then, I mean, look, I think their World Series is legitimate, but they also won it the year that there was only 60 games in the regular season. So, take that with a grain of salt. I mean, you look at some of these teams, the Angels with Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani, and Anthony Rendon. I mean, actually, no, you got three really good players, but the rest of the team just sucks. They're not going to make the playoffs again. Even going back to, remember in, 2011, 2010, when the Phillies put together that big four of Roy Halladay, Cole Hamels, Cliff Lee, Roy Oswalt. I mean, that team didn't win. So, ultimately, I mean, I think the proof's in the pudding that more often than not, and really not very much at all, these super teams that are quote unquote assembled do not win. So I say, look, I mean, it's going to be a rebuilding process. If you signed Juan Soto to $500 million, like you talked about, you were going to handicap, other resources to sign around him because ultimately he wanted to be with the team that could contend. But I think it's kind of hard to do that if you're going to pay him over $500 million. So overall, I think we're just going to have to accept, like, look, this is a rebuilding phase. Fans like you and I are used to it, but I think that's kind of the state of the franchise right now. What do you think about all of that?
Yeah. So, but before I forget, there's a scouting expert on prospects, Eric Longerhagen. I forget where I heard it, but at first, but there's one of his sayings as it relates to Juan Soto was that the best time to trade him is never, and the second best time is right now. Just because obviously, like you said, you get the most value back for him when he has the most team control left, particularly given that it is right now at a relatively speaking team friendly rate before you obviously have to pay him, and then it spikes. In terms of that, they got the most value they could by doing it now. I would say that, and like you said as well, by making the trade, you get a lot. There's a lot of talent that you get back, and it's all obviously dirt cheap once they're once they reach the major league level as well. And that allows you to do a lot more. You get them and they produce well in theory, hopefully. It allows you to spend on other guys. Shoot, if they want to pay to bring Trey Turner back, they can do that now. I would say to the point of you made about in the past, there have been stars you let go. And then there's always, well, we'll pay the next guy. We'll pay the next guy. And Juan Soto became the next guy. If they, and I agree that it would have obviously been great to keep him. I think, especially given who his agent is, if you wanted to do that, you needed to strike really early. The moment that he became a bona fide superstar, Scott Boras was getting to free agency. There's just no way. That's his playbook. That and not countering when the team gives you a contract offer. Which was one of the more frustrating things about these whole negotiations is that the Nationals would put out something, they'd say no, and they wouldn't say why. They wouldn't counter. So it became clear that they just needed to move on. But all in all, to reset the way that they did, that's really the best that they could do. That'll help them get better the soonest, I believe. We'll see kind of where this goes with Soto. I don't know. He may still hit free agency. Like, I don't know if this helps the Padres now. I don't know if 3 years from now it matters, or it could be hurting them because they lost the prospects. And if you can't pay Soto, then I mean, you lost out. But And actually, to that point, if they were to pay Soto, back to your point about big contracts, at that point, you would be paying him, whether it's a $500+ million deal over who knows how many years it'll be, 10, 15, anywhere in that range. You're also paying Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, 3 monster contracts. And like you said, as we see with a team like the Angels, it's probably the best example. You have Mike Trout, you have Anthony Rendon. I guess they're not really paying Ohtani yet, but if they want to go down that road, I mean, they're every year they're not really even contending for the playoffs. And that's frankly, that's for the last this being the 3rd season. That's really where the Nationals have been, and they're not even paying Soto yet. So it's definitely something that I think benefits them long term for sure. And just fundamentally, kind of like I laid out, I don't think that the unless you're the Dodgers and can just spend literally on anything, like it seems like the money just, it never stops flowing in. It's just not feasible, I don't think, to pay one and particularly multiple guys as much as they would have had to pay Soto. And you think about it too, they're already, the Patrick Corbin contract will go away. And I don't know if we're going to talk about Corbin at all. That's a whole other discussion. But they're still going to be paying Steven Strasburg $35 million a year, I guess, for the next 3-4 years. And I mean, they're not even getting a return on that right now. We'll see if that changes. But yeah, big contracts like that are just really hard to manage. So to flip it for cheap, super controllable guys that hopefully, if they hit their upsides, can contribute, whether they're just productive players or potential all-star level talents, we'll see. But it gives you a lot more flexibility to go out and get whoever you want in free agency. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. We'll see what happens once an ownership change comes as well, what exactly their budget is, but it either way gives you a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, that might throw a whole new wrench into the future of the team, especially with whoever ends up buying the team. And people forget, I mean, Bryce Harper walked away from the Nationals as a free agent. They didn't get anything in return for him. They probably should have traded him at the trade deadline, when really they were kind of in a similar situation in 2018. So I guarantee you, I think people would have been a lot more upset if they let Juan Soto walk and didn't get anything in return. At least here they got some high-end prospects, as you've been suggesting. Some other notes I wanted to add: Victor Robles is now the only position player, I believe, on the roster that he started Game 7, but that is still on the team from Game 7. The only position player. Pitching wise, you've got Steven Strasburg, Patrick Corbin, Anibal Sanchez, and Sean Doolittle. Although it doesn't seem like guys like Steven Strasburg or Sean Doolittle are on the team, given their injury history. Anibal Sanchez, he's obviously been who he is, and then Patrick Corbin, one of the worst pitchers in baseball. And then, obviously, and I believe you are going to the game, but Juan Soto is and the Padres are coming back to DC next weekend, August 12th through the 14th. So talk about, I mean, this is basically going to be your World Series if you're a Nationals fan this year. Do you plan on going to the game, and how do you think Soto will be received by the Nats fan base?
Yeah, so I will be going to one of the games that weekend. So the return of Soto and Bell. It'll be, the rest of the season will be interesting. That attendance has already been low, and it's gonna plummet just given with that trade, and obviously the guys that they got back in the trade aren't even on the team yet. I guess technically Mackenzie Gore is, but he's injured right now. But the turnout for those games will be, I mean, I'd imagine the biggest turnout they've had all season. And I would imagine that he'll be received more favorably than someone like Bryce Harper, which obviously you can't be received much worse than that. He still gets booed, which is crazy to me. 4 years later, but Yeah, I would hope and assume that he will be received a lot more favorably. And I do want to say too, and I know that this is the the major piece in this deal was Juan Soto, but don't forget about Josh Bell. Josh Bell, for the 2 years the Nationals had him, granted he was about to hit free agency, and I don't know they would be able to keep him, but he'd been a highly productive player. He, I know we've talked about it. He at least arguably should have been an all-star this year. And if you take out what April and maybe the very beginning of May last season, he was playing like an all-star then too. But yeah, for sure. Both of them, and particularly Soto, it'll be really interesting to see how they're received. And I mean, I know, speaking for myself, I will definitely give him some loud cheers when he shows up and his first at bat comes.
Yeah, I keep forgetting to mention Josh Bell, but he, being part of this trade, I mean, arguably with how bad the Nats have been the last 2 years, I mean, he was, right up there with Soto in terms of, best player on the team. So definitely a valuable piece the Padres got, and definitely a guy they should have traded, given that they probably wouldn't have been able to re-sign him. And he probably increased his value, given the 2 great years he had with Washington. I guess that's also where I want to go next, because you did allude to this in the article. I mean, I was just confused why the Nats didn't make more trades. I mean, this Juan Soto Josh Bell trade was the only trade. They did end up actually making a trade with the Braves for a solid prospect, Austin Green, I believe his name is. He seems to be a good prospect. But you look at it. Adrianza was the guy that the Nats traded, but you had Nelson Cruz, you had Kyle Finnegan, Carl Edwards Jr., Steve Cishek, Victor Robles, Cesar Hernandez, Michael Franco, Patrick Corbin. I mean, even if I'm sure you're probably not going to get, you're definitely not going to get high end prospects like you got for Soto and Bell. But I mean, just anything. I mean, you're not competing this year. Some of these guys, if not all, almost all of them have expiring contracts or bad contracts. Why not trade them? Just get something in return and really kind of focus on a full rebuild mode. Were you also surprised that these guys were not traded, or that the Nationals only did basically one major trade and 2 trades overall for the deadline?
Yeah, so the trade you're referring to, real quick, is R.A. Adrianza to the Braves for a outfield prospect, Trey Harris, who I believe was, according to MLB, I think was their number 29 prospect. It's kind of shocking to me that they got that much for Adrianza, just because he played a couple months, and yeah, he's got positional versatility, but he hasn't hit much at all. And it's funny, in my article, I wrote about all those guys you said, maybe even a couple more. I didn't even include Adrianza because I didn't think they could trade him. I'm pretty shocked that they got anything for him. I alluded to that on Twitter, but I guess the reason they did it was just because they had familiarity with him. He'd been with the Braves last year. But to your point, I'm really surprised that that's all they did. They had guys that they could have dealt. Like, I don't know what you could have gotten for a Nelson Cruz. Like, he's underperformed. They brought him in to trade him, and he just hasn't produced nearly to the degree that they'd hoped for. Guys like Cesar Hernandez, they obviously tried. They had him as their leadoff hitter all year, playing every day, second base every day, and he still hasn't hit a home run all season. So the writing was kind of on the wall. You weren't going to get much, and I guess maybe they just value, whether it's leadership value, veteran presence. I don't entirely know, but they didn't get what they wanted. Same for a guy like, obviously, like a Michael Franco, Victor Robles. Victor Robles is a little interesting to me, just because, I mean, one, he is cheap and controllable, and he is, granted, it's baby steps, but he is hitting a little bit better this year. Still not to the level he did in 2019, and certainly not to the degree that he was expected to. But the fact that he's shown incremental progress, and obviously you know what you're getting defensively, and he's even, I think he's 13 of 14 stealing bases this year. So maybe they do see some progress, because that's an area he'd struggled too. He used to get caught stealing often. He just wasn't he just wasn't attentive on the bases. He wasn't nearly the base runner he should have been. So maybe they see something there. So I kind of understand not trading him. I probably still would have, but and then a guy like a Yadiel Hernandez, again, cheap and controllable, but he's already in his mid-30s. So he obviously doesn't fit the timeline. You get to the bullpen guys, you mentioned, like you obviously couldn't really deal Tanner Rainey because I think it just came out today that he underwent Tommy John surgery, which you feel for the guy and the injuries he's had. But you get to guys like Kyle Finnegan, Carl Edwards, Steve Cishek, even like an Erasmo Ramirez. They felt like guys to me that there should have been at least a halfway decent market for. So most of those guys are controllable and young enough. So maybe they see them as pieces moving forward. I don't necessarily know how much I do. Finnegan, I guess, because I think he's got 3 more years of club control, and right now he's their closer. So I don't know if that's necessarily optimal going forward. I think even he has said that he doesn't particularly, I think it was similar with Daniel Hudson. He doesn't particularly like being a closer. He prefers whether it's a 7th, 8th inning thing or being a mop-up guy in big situations with guys on base or something like that. I think he's a good enough complementary piece in the bullpen, and that's what a contending team would have used him as. I think so. I thought that him proving to be capable as a closer, in addition to that, you should have been able to get something. A Patrick Corbin, I know we've talked about it. My general stance on Corbin is it's a big contract. He's come nowhere near living up to it outside of 2019, of course, when he was outstanding and a huge piece in them winning the World Series. But since then, he's fallen well short. I
wanted to ask you about that, not to cut you off, but obviously this probably might play into your answer. Why do you think he's been so bad? I mean, you look at, a lot of the pitching categories, he's among last in the league. Some people are saying it's because, 2019, the postseason, he was overused. He was the winning pitcher in Game 7, but, to me, it just doesn't seem how you can kind of point that to something that's going on now 3 years later. So what do you think is going on with Patrick Corbin? And of course, you can continue with the other prospects, but I feel like it was important to focus on why does it seem like he's just fallen off a cliff since the 19 postseason.
Yeah, definitely. That's really important given the size of his contract as well. He's a guy that they really need to perform, and outside of 2019, he hasn't lived up at all. I think so. He was obviously. I honestly think they kind of overrated his stuff. The moment if he was ever going to lose any velocity at all, any kind of feel for his pitches, it's just not like he's entirely dependent on if he can get into if the fastball can stay in the low 90s and he can command it well. Outside of that, there wasn't a ton to me that was all that devastating in his arsenal, really. And plus, I guess just over time too, you start seeing the same stuff over and over, and nothing about it is overpowering. It just becomes easier to hit. You just get more familiar with it. But I don't think, I will say that it's the overuse in the playoffs. I was willing to believe that a little bit in 2020, and even that felt like a stretch because the season got delayed. So it's like I would have gotten it like if it was early in 2020 in a regular season without the whole pandemic and it started in April. I could have gotten that, but yeah, it's really just that. To me, his stuff wasn't great. And I do honestly think that there's kind of an emotional component to it too, because one, it's just in his head, and it just snowballs that he's struggling. And he's just, I think there's a lot to once you kind of lose your way for a little bit, especially if no one's all that there to back you, and you're just getting booed by the fans. Like it's just hard to get back in that mental space. Baseball is a really mental game in that way. But yeah, and I think back to what I was saying. My stance though with Corbin overall, just kind of not production aside, but he is, for one, he is a veteran presence, so that does have some value. And he also, for as much as he has struggled, he is usually able to at least eat innings, which, I mean, just given the kind of lack of talent in throughout the pitching staff, really, starters, bullpen, they need that. They I mean, you've seen in games when they struggle to go very deep, and you start asking the bullpen to cover 5-6 innings, it can get ugly. But and in addition to that, like I was talking about with the rotation, they're already struggling even with Corbin. You're throwing out guys like, I mean, to start the season, you're talking a Josh Rogers. The plan was Anibal Sanchez, and he got hurt, obviously. But so whether it's a Josh Rogers or an Aaron Sanchez, or now apparently it's Corey Abbott, like these guys aren't really guys that belong in big league rotations anyway, and that's with Corbin in the rotation. So obviously you move on from him, or move him to the bullpen, like people have said, or anything like that. It gets dicey. You were banking on by now probably maybe even Cole Henry, but particularly Cade Cavalli kind of being here by now, which is that's kind of its own discussion as well, kind of the player development side of things. But given that we're not there yet, I think you need a guy like Corbin. I maybe would have been more willing to give up someone like, well, Paulo Espino to me, maybe. I don't know if there would have necessarily been takers, but because he is an older guy, but he is cheap, controllable. He's effective as a starter, effective in the bullpen. You feel like someone maybe could have used him as a swing man or something like that. But it kind of became null and void once he went on the IL. But Eric Fetty hasn't really lived up either, but he's been more effective than Corbin, at least. He's controllable as well, cheap, still on his I think he's still in his arbitration years. Well, no, he's definitely still in his arbitration years. But so maybe someone like that. Overall, the Soto trade aside, the trade deadline was pretty underwhelming. And I think not that in hindsight, it was kind of telling, just the timing of things. So the trade deadline was at 6 p.m. And at, I want to say 4 p.m., Mike Rizzo, I mean, he holds a press conference, and you just wonder, could this have waited? Like, shouldn't you be on the phones right now trying to make a deal? And sure enough, nothing else happened. So, yeah, that's also another discussion, whether where things go for the front office as a whole, including Rizzo, with an ownership change on the way. But overall, yeah, I don't think they, as much as they did get a lot for Soto, which I think obviously is the biggest aspect of the trade deadline, whether you keep or trade him. There were more little things along the margins that they could have done to just lottery tickets, and they, for whatever reason, various reasons, I guess, they just opted against it. And now we see guys like Nelson Cruz. Yesterday, he came off the bench. or not even came off the bench. He didn't enter the game, I don't think. That's something, I don't know how much we'll see that going forward, but actually in Cruz's case, it may happen quite a bit now that you have Luke Voigt, but who'll probably DH some. But overall, yeah, I mean, I would like to see, and I think we will see those guys kind of either playing less, or in like Cesar Hernandez's case, batting lower in the lineup, letting guys like Luis Garcia. I've been calling for it for a while. He needs to. He hit second, I think, yesterday. I don't know that that's necessarily where he ends up, but at least let him prove whether he can do it or not, especially given this is a hard rebuild at this point. So just see what he can do there. And he actually did perform well too. Yeah, I would say overall they didn't capitalize nearly to the extent that they could have. I don't think they would have been little additions, but sometimes those guys hit, and they didn't. They just kept all the veterans, which was a little disappointing, but it's the way it goes.
Were you surprised with how bad the team is this year? I mean, I feel like it's partially. I mean, we both predicted they wouldn't make the playoffs, but I think it's partially as a fan, like, oh, our team can't be the worst team in baseball, and they literally are. I mean, did you expect it to be this bad this year?
They're the worst team in baseball by quite a bit, actually. As bad as the A's have been, the Nats blow them out of the water. I am surprised that they're this bad. I was low on them. I thought that they'd be flirting right around that 100 loss mark. They might get to 110. So you can. It's hard to ever expect, I think, a team to be this bad. I mean, this is as bad as they've been when they first came to DC. No, I didn't think they'd be this bad. But there were people talking they could win 70, maybe even pushing 75 games. That was always a stretch. But really, it just goes to show that when there are holes in your roster, when you're banking on a guy like Juan Soto, and I guess Josh Bell too, to carry your team, this can be what happens. It's a 26-man roster, not a 2-man roster. So it is. I will say also, you saw a lot down the stretch last year. Granted, they were still losing a lot of games, but guys like Elaine Thomas, for example, he hit really well when the Nats got him. You're kind of banking on him being close to that, and he did have one hot stretch, I think, in like May or June, where he was hitting well, hit a handful of home runs in a short stretch. Outside of that, you haven't gotten a ton. There's been a lot of that. I mean, you look at especially now that Soto and Bell are gone, you look at a lineup they'll put out any given day. You struggle to find a lot of league average hitters. Which in hindsight, I don't know that should be all that shocking. Even if a guy like Carter Kieboom would have stayed healthy, you wouldn't really get more out of him than you are out of Maikel Franco, most likely. Yeah, there's just a lot. I think there was entering this season, just in general, not so much for myself, although even to an extent, because I didn't think they'd be this bad. But there kind of was some wishful thinking, just that some of the lightning in the bottle that they caught might continue. Some guys might just improve, and it hasn't really happened. I don't think anyone could have seen the starting, well, definitely not the starting rotation being as messy as it's been. You figured that you get something out of Steven Strasburg. I mean, I figured it'd take him probably a couple months to get going, but that you certainly had to hope at least that he'd be on the mound at this point in the year. And sure enough, he wound up getting hurt again. So that certainly affected their win-loss record in a major way, because that would have easily been your as long as he was kind of himself, that would have pretty clearly been your ace starting pitcher. Now you're talking, I don't even know, would it be Josiah Gray, Eric Fetty? I'm not sure. Like they any pick out anyone, you get no better than like a mid-4s ERA, which, I mean, it's tough to win with that. And it's tough to win when actually, I will say the bullpen hasn't been terrible. That's actually been
Just recently, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a little better than I expected, and that's even with a guy like Tanner Rainey now on the shelf. So that's impressive. You haven't gotten much out of like Sean Doolittle, various guys like that. Will Harris, that's a name we haven't heard in a while. He's barely pitched for the Nats, but he would have been a stabilizing presence there too. But the bullpen's been okay. But particularly the back end of your bullpen only matters so much when your starting rotation can't keep you in games. So it's worse than I thought, but in hindsight, you can kind of see how we got here.
And something else I was thinking about, Stephen, was talking about the long-term contracts the Nats have signed, and really the only one that has truly worked out was Max Scherzer when he signed that 6-year, $210 million deal. I mean, he won 2 Cy Youngs, a World Series, multiple All-Star appearances, multiple All-Star starts, multiple top 5 Cy Young finishes. I mean, there were several years where he finished second, right behind Jacob deGrom. So, but you look at it. I mean, Steven Strasburg, he's been hurt. Patrick Corbin. He has been a shell of himself. Ryan Zimmerman, I know people hate to hear it, but the contract they signed him to, he really did not live up to it, even though he was Mr. National and everything. It makes me wonder, do you think they should have re-signed or should have signed guys like Trey Turner? I know we mentioned Juan Soto, again, given the situation, it wasn't going to happen, but Trey Turner, Anthony Rendon, it looks like they made the right decision because he's hurt. And, that's obviously affecting the Angels. Do you think maybe they should have signed someone else to a long-term deal like a Trey Turner or something? Or are you have the mindset, look, it's baseball, and given some of the other circumstances, all being said, they probably have made the right decisions and not they've actually probably made more bad decisions in signing the people they have signed to long-term contracts.
Yeah, to me, even in the moment, but particularly now that Soto's gone, to me, Trey Turner feels like the one that got away. That's not even taken into account as well. He wasn't a Scott Boras client. Like that's a guy that I feel like if you could have gone at his negotiations different. Like I know that I think it was in 2019 or entering 2019, something like that. They offered him like 6-7 years for 100 million or something like that. Like before he became the true all-star that he is now, they tried to strike then, maybe lowballed him a little bit. And obviously he didn't take it. And after that, supposedly it was impacted by COVID. They made it harder for him to offer him anything. And then he became one of the best hitters in the league. And they didn't want to pay him at that rate. But yeah, to me, he's the guy, even aside from just the speed, which you could argue doesn't always age great. Even aside from that, he's just become such a great hitter that you could have you could have gotten him for less than, say, the Mets gave Francisco Lindor. And Lindor has been okay, but he hasn't lived up to that contract. So you could have paid him less than that, and you would have been fine. That could have been your 1, 2, 3 hitter, wherever you want to put him. Granted, if you did that, you wouldn't have gotten Josiah Gray, Keibert Ruiz, who they've been solid. The jury's still out on exactly how good they'll be, but that to me is the one. If you want to pick out one, that's to me probably the one that you probably should have tried to lock up. Not to mention just at shortstop, just that being a defensive premium position as well, even aside from what he brings offensively. Anything on the base pass you get, that to me is one that you wish you could have back, I think.
And my question, the next question I had for you, you kind of alluded to this earlier. Obviously, we are assuming that there will be new ownership come this offseason. Do you think when they take over, they will want their new regime, meaning they'll get rid of Rizzo in the front office and they may even get rid of Davey Martinez? I mean, I remember asking you that the last podcast we have in terms of, is Davey Martinez really safe now that they've embraced a hard rebuild? Or, I mean, look, given his track record, I mean, again, not trying to hate, but other than 2019, where even then 19-31 turned it around, made the World Series, it's been 500 at best, and really the last 2 years, I mean, just completely terrible. Do you think new ownership may come in and say, hey, we want to get rid of everyone, bring in our own guys? Or do you think maybe Davey's safe and Rizzo maybe a little bit of a hot water? What's your take on that situation once the new regime comes in?
That's something I've really started thinking about with this trade having happened. To me, it's so starting with Davey Martinez. It's to me, it's kind of hard to justify at this point. Obviously, 2019 happened. Everything else, it hasn't been great, and it's trending down even further. Now, I know that it's in large part because they've traded guys away, and Davey can't control that. But it's kind of hard to justify. Say this team loses 110 games. He's trending the wrong direction. Now an ownership change is going to come. There's just there are a lot of things that are against him, just trending against him. So with him, I'd have to imagine that once an ownership change happens, whether that's in the winter or going into next year at some point, I kind of have to imagine that one of the moves they'll make will be to find a new manager. On the whole, I think that you're gonna. I would imagine we'd see a lot of changes. I don't know. It's something I've talked about a bit today, just with some people. I go back and forth on exactly what the core of the Nationals' problems in terms of like player development and all of that are. Somebody actually mentioned to me that they think it's not so much a just an overall inability to like evaluate talent or anything like that, and it's almost that they just haven't invested in the minor leagues. Because you think about it, there have been, I think it would have been last year, maybe the year before, that when it came out. Well, not like we all know that they're one of the furthest behind teams in terms of just embracing analytics and things like that. But in addition to that, they're stingy when it comes to minor league player living arrangements. So just overall, they just haven't really invested there. Even I do like that this past off season, they kind of realigned the front office. They changed their I forget what exactly, Deshaun Watson, not to be confused with the other guy, but I forget exactly what his title is, but it's essentially they're like the director of minor league player development. And he has, I feel like things are trending in the right direction there. So I don't know if that's maybe a guy you try to keep around and hope that combined with whether you get a new manager, maybe you get a new GM as well. Because I mean, Mike Rizzo has been around for a while, and the moves he made at the trade deadline really put a bad taste in my mouth. Honestly, just not getting anything for some of those rental contracts or the relievers. So I don't know where that goes. I kind of tend to believe that they make a change at GM. But in terms of on the minor league side, I would like to keep Johnny DePuglia. I'll say that. Their international director, because they have done well in the international market. But by and large, I think you'll see a lot of changes. Um, the extent to which that happens probably depends on who the new owner is. Like I could see, say it's Ted Leonsis, I could see him maybe retaining more guys just because he's a minority owner now. So there's already some commitment to the guys that are here. But aside from that, and I don't necessarily have names to spew off, but I would imagine that they make a lot of changes, and then that kind of changes how you view probably the prospects that they got, because a lot of the talk is they're just not developing players at the minor league level. So why would you get these guys in the low levels of the minors that have high upsides, but there's also a considerable floor with them. They could just not pan out if you don't develop them well. I'd imagine that changes come, and with that, the hope at least would be that you'd get a little better on that side as well, and be able to make the most of the talent that you bring in. Even in Austin Voth, I don't know. You've probably seen that. It wasn't directed to the Nationals front office per se, but he did make comments about he joins the Orioles and he's suddenly seeing not even like advanced analytics or anything, just basic things like pitch charts, things like that you would think that every team puts out there. Evidently, the Nationals don't. That's something that I think, given his comments, but also just given that there being an ownership change, I think they'll take a hard look at. And if they're not satisfied, there'll be a lot of changes. And I think that's the direction they'll go. I think you'll see pretty close to them cleaning house, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and again, we'll see who the new owner might be. I know there's been a South Korean businessman who's been connected to potentially buying the team. So yeah, see what happens. Obviously, that will set probably into motion a lot of changes, as Stephen was mentioning. My final Nats question. I've had so much fun talking about the Nats for an hour. Who's the jersey that you buy now? I mean, I was seeing a video on Twitter of someone having an Anthony Rendon jersey, Trey Turner, Juan Soto, Max Scherzer. All those guys have left. I know you got a Juan Soto jersey for your birthday. I remember after the World Series, I got a Max Scherzer jersey. So obviously, I think it's a little bit different because they won the World Series, so you can still wear it pretty proudly. But obviously, it doesn't feel the same when they're not on the team. So who's the jersey? If you had to pick one guy, you would say that this is probably the guy, the go-to get the jersey guy. Obviously, there's not a lot of bright spots to see on the team right now, but who would you say is that guy if you had to pick one?
I'd say it's probably one of the guys they got from the Dodgers last year. I lean towards Josiah Gray. There's a case for Keibert Ruiz too, I think, who is definitely showing a lot of promise behind the plate. I think it's probably Gray, especially given right now, like I said, you could argue he's the ace of the rotation, and he'll be around for a while at least. I actually don't know who his agent is. I hope it's not Scott Boras, but assuming it isn't, that's a guy that you'll have for another, say, 5 years before he even hits free agency. And then hopefully we'll see from there whether they can keep a guy like that, or we'll see if it's even worthwhile at that point. But if nothing else, he's a steady, pretty reliable starting pitcher. He'll be around for a while. Don't have to worry about you buy it and then he gets traded or something like that. I don't really foresee that. So that would be my guy. I think he just seems like a really genuinely good guy too, from what I've seen just in videos or any interviews that he does. So that'd be the guy for me. But to your point, it's there's not an obvious answer, and that's it's kind of the nature of things in a rebuild. But it definitely it's going to take some getting used to. There not being an obvious face of the team. I didn't even mention Luis Garcia. There's probably a case for him too. He's definitely one of their better players right now. I have thoughts about him at shortstop, but in terms of as a hitter, and he'll be around for a while, he'll be productive. It's a case for him too, but I would lean Josiah Gray.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was gonna go Keibert Ruiz. He's shown really promise over the play, especially throwing out runners on the base paths. I mean, he's been really good at that this year. Or Josiah Gray. I mean, the two prospects he got from the Dodgers. If you want to be nostalgic and you don't already have the jersey, Steven Strasburg, because I know he hasn't played, but he won the World Series MVP. If you don't have the jersey, maybe him. But yeah, I would say if you're talking about actively playing right now and the part of the plan for the future, I would say go with you, Ruiz or Gray. So what a great discussion on the Nats. Obviously, being Nats fans, we're still gonna, and being diehard Nats fans like me and you are, we're still gonna follow the team. But certainly, I think we're in it for a while in terms of a rebuild. So we'll see what happens. I guess really quickly. I mean, do you think when would you say, if you had to project, if things go right, if the prospects look like they're growing in the way you want them to, developing in the way you want them to, when do you think realistically the Nats could be back to contention? Is it 2024? Is it later than that? What would you say about that?
I think they could be decent in 2024. I would say that realistically, having real playoff expectations, and I mean, we'll see about whether it's championship contention or anything like that, but at least feeling like you have a realistic shot at making the playoffs, I would say probably 2025. Just because, I mean, you see how the roster looks right now, and some of the most of the guys really that they got in the Soto Bell trade are long-term projections. They're guys that aren't going to get to the big leagues until, I think they're projecting, like Robert Hassel, it's like mid to late season of 23. The rest of it, you're talking 2024, 2025. And at that point too, you'll have guys like a Cade Cavalli, Cole Henry, guys like that in the rotation. You'll have a couple years under their belt. So I think realistically that's probably a better time frame to look at. Like I said, I think they should be a decent team, maybe right around 500 in 24. You would hope, but I would think being a legitimate playoff team with potentially higher aspirations, I would say probably 2025.
I agree with you. It's definitely going to be a several year rebuild as well. But a great discussion there on the Nats to close out the podcast, which, by the way, has been so much fun. We're already over an hour in. I went back and watched the tapes of our before the season World Series prediction. And Stephen, you had the Dodgers over the Red Sox. I think the Red Sox, based on the standings right now, are probably not making the playoffs or last. I think it's a pretty safe bet there. But obviously, you have the Dodgers, who are comfortably in the lead in the NL West, even with the Padres getting all their pieces, getting Juan Soto. It would take an epic collapse to overtake them. I had Mets and White Sox. The Mets are looking pretty good right now, currently up 3.5 games on the Braves. The White Sox are not looking as good. So we both, we were 1 for 2. I mean, we had a good pick and definitely a so-so pick. But I guess I'll give you a chance with a mulligan. Do you think, I'm sure you'll definitely obviously change your Boston pick, but who would be your World Series pick right now to meet in the Fall Classic? And also, I guess, because we didn't really talk about it from the Padres perspective, give me your thoughts on the Padres. Do you think that they should be considered in the mix as a serious World Series contender?
I wouldn't consider them a favorite per se, but I think that their chances definitely improved. I think it most likely comes down to our two National League teams. I think whether it's the Dodgers or the Mets, who they haven't gotten a whole lot even out of like Jacob deGrom or Max Scherzer this year, and they're still, I guess, the second best record in the NL behind the Dodgers. So I would say it probably comes down to them. I still lean Dodgers, in part because at this point, I think they'll be pretty battle tested now they're going to have to go up against the Padres. I think that'll. I think that could potentially help them, and even any. I guess they don't have a ton of younger guys, but to the extent they do, they'll be playing in some bigger moments, bigger games against the Padres than they had been at all earlier in the season. So I think I do still lean Dodgers, and I think they probably would be my team to win it. I feel kind of non-committal with the Yankees. I don't love the lineup. Obviously, is great. I just don't feel confident in their rotation. Like even Garrett Cole, we've seen at times this year, last year. Say what you want about Spider Tack or anything like that. He'll have blow up games, and there's not a ton behind him. Like early in the year, and part of how they got out so far ahead was, frankly, starting pitchers overperforming. I feel like, and that division is strong too. So I feel like they'll probably come down to earth. I don't want to say the Astros. I really don't. It's no better than the Yankees, really. But I think that's probably the direction I'm leaning, because it to me it doesn't even feel like they've played as well as they can. They're outside of like a Yordan Alvarez, who's been hitting spectacularly. And they added a guy like Trey Mancini too, who can take over for Yuli Gurriel, who'd been struggling pretty mightily. So yeah, I would say I feel like we've been here before, but I'd go Dodgers, and my AL team would be the Astros. But I would lean Dodgers.
I agree with you on the Padres. I still, even with getting Juan Soto and Josh Bell, and obviously having Tatis when he comes back healthy, and Manny Machado, you got some veteran pitchers like Blake Snell and Yu Darvish. I still would have them behind the Dodgers, behind the Mets, behind the Braves. I mean, they're looking pretty good. They just paid a bunch of money to Austin Riley, who I'm glad made the All-Star team. He was definitely snubbed. We know as Nats fans how he killed the Nats pitching. But I'd still have the Padres at least fourth behind those three teams. I'm sticking with the Mets. Really loving my World Series preseason pick. Like you mentioned, Scherzer and DeGrom haven't even really been 100%, and they've been able to still do a really great job. Buck Showalter, I think he's showing how great of a manager he is. Where you look at teams like the Phillies, who fired Joe Girardi, and the Angels, who fired Joe Madden, when they were also talking to Buck Showalter, you're seeing the type of manager he is, and obviously those teams are trying to figure out what their long-term solution is. So I'm still going the Mets. I'm going to go with the Yankees because I think it would be great to have a Subway World Series again. Happened in 2000, and the Yankees have not been in the World Series since 2009. And so I believe it was the second. Really, it was the first ever decade the Yankees went without appearing in the World Series. So you feel like it's time for them to make it back. Aaron Judge is having a monster season. He may break Roger Maris's single season record. So I'm going Mets and Yankees. I'm still leaning towards the Mets for my World Series pick there. So definitely a great discussion there. I wanted to ask you one question before we close that I thought was kind of a fun question. Because obviously, we being from the DC area, there are also still a lot of Oriole fans, and the Orioles, by the way, I mean, we could have a discussion on them. They're doing a really great job right now. They're only a couple games out of the playoffs, and their farm system is really set. Do you think, because, for Oriole fans, Cal Ripken Jr. is kind of their guy. I'm curious, do you think if Cal Ripken played in today's age, would he have stayed with the Orioles his entire career? I mean, I know some people say, well, his dad had ties to the organization, so it's not completely apples and oranges, but I mean, just look at the way the game is going. You really see guys very rarely play for one team, kind of like Ryan Zimmerman did for all those years with the Nationals. Although respectfully, I mean, he was not the same level as some of these other guys that we've been talking about that have left the Nats. Aaron Judge. I mean, people are saying he may leave the Yankees. If they don't offer him the right contract. Do you think Cal would have stayed in today's age, or do you think he would have ended up like Soto, either traded or, you would have had to sign him for a lot of money?
That's a tough one, because it does seem to me like there is a bit of a Zimmerman field there, that there just generally just was a sense of loyalty. I guess one important question in this would be who's his agent? Because if it's Scott Boras, the answer is definitely no. That's tough. I tend to believe yes, just because, like I said, I kind of get that Zimmerman feel with him. But yeah, obviously the league is changed in many ways. Most notably, just the way with free agency and the contracts you can get, and I'm sure teams would be throwing money out there at someone like him. But I'll say yes. I think he took a lot of pride in being that guy for the Orioles, similarly to the way Zimmerman did with the Nationals. But yeah, definitely interesting question. I really do think it kind of depends on who his agent would be, because we even talked about with like the Braves. None of them. I don't know off the top of my head who their agents are, but none of them are Boras clients, and they've embraced kind of the I guess something about the Braves culture, and the Braves have they've been aggressive in signing guys early, which I feel like is something the Orioles would probably do with a guy like Cal. Just get out ahead of it, not have to necessarily pay him at what you think his market value would be down the road. By the way, I totally agree on the Austin Riley stance there. I think that guy's going to be really good for a really long time. But on Cal, yeah, I think that's a guy that was just so loyal. I mean, you obviously see that and never missing a game too for so long. That's a guy I think it would value staying in Baltimore more than a lot of the other guys that you see sign these massive contracts at just whoever throws out the most money. But yeah, definitely an interesting question though.
And speaking on the Braves, I mean, Freddie Freeman, it's been reported he wanted to re-sign with the Braves, but there might have been some miscommunication with his agent. So, they obviously have, seems like guys who are not Boras clients. Great discussion there. And really quickly, though, I did remember wanted to ask you this, because the Hall of Fame game for the NFL site, so kind of the unofficial kickoff of counting down to the NFL regular season with the preseason starting tonight. I know you weren't bullish on it back when we did this podcast for the MLB preview season back in March, I believe. But are you a little bit more confident maybe that the Commanders can win the division? I mean, look, Carson Wentz, I think he's got a lot to prove this year. You look at a team like the Cowboys, they've taken a step back, lost some of their linemen, traded away Amari Cooper. Dak is still the best quarterback in the division, but, he's going to have to work with maybe less talent surrounding him. The Eagles with Jalen Hurts, you've got to give him credit. And maybe we'll see with the Giants, who knows, maybe Daniel Jones can hit a reset button here with the new coaching regime in there, but with Brian Gable, who I think is a great coach. But are you a little bit more confident maybe that the Commanders can win the NFC East?
A little bit, and I think I would feel better about it if I knew kind of what the status of particularly like Logan Thomas to an extent, but particularly Chase Young. I just don't know. He's still. I just don't know when he'll come back, and that's aside from just how productive he'll be, because he hasn't thus far, even when on the field, lived up to expectations. I tend to believe that at some point here soon, whether it's this year, next year, that'll improve. But I don't know. That's still an unknown, and when he'll even be back is an unknown. I like I said though, I do feel a little bit better than I did, because Jahan Dotson. I tell you what, with particularly with Terry McLaurin kind of out while he was waiting on the extension that he inevitably got, he's granted, I haven't seen a ton of it aside from anything that's just out on Twitter via video or anything like that, but all the reports are that he's looked really good. I know that fans, I actually thought that he would be a decent receiver. I'll say that. I was higher on him than a lot of people were, but the general consensus was that they reached on him in the draft. He was more of, whether it's a late first round or second round pick, something like that, not a mid first round guy. And it's all the messaging is pretty similar, to be honest, to when Washington drafted Terry McLaurin. It wasn't a guy you expected to do a whole lot, and then next thing you know, we're not going to even play him much in the preseason because we know he's going to start for us. He's probably going to be our top receiver. It seems kind of similar with Dotson. So if they can have that kind of 1-2 punch at receiver and get anything out of like a Curtis Samuel, who's finally starting to practice a little bit, we'll see how long that lasts. But and I'm intrigued. I don't know exactly how I feel yet, but with their running game, with Antonio Gibson plus Brian Robinson, a 1-2 punch like that, I think that could help Gibson, frankly, take some load off of him. So to me, it's less about like a Carson Wentz, who I still don't feel great about them giving up as much as they did for him when they could have had a similar type player for cheaper and then maybe done better in the draft or something like that. But overall, I think it's in play. I do think they have a chance. I think I said Cowboys when we first talked about it. It's probably my team to beat. I think I still lean in that direction. Although I don't exactly know outside of first of all, Ezekiel Elliott, I'm not expecting a ton from. And outside of like a CeeDee Lamb, I don't exactly know what their passing game is going to look like either. But I am expecting, I don't know how big a step there is to take for like a Micah Parsons, because he was outstanding his rookie year. But if he can build on that in any way, if say a guy like a Trayvon Diggs can be a little more consistent, add some, if you take away some chunk plays he gives up, in addition to the interceptions that he makes, I still lean that way. I think there's just overall a little more upside with them, but I do feel better about Washington. Whereas I thought they were more of like a 7-win team. I think that they could flirt with 8, 9, even 10. And at that point, you're right there in the mix to win the division.
Stephen, this has been, by the way, I do agree with you. I think they're in the mix, and I do believe in Carson Wentz, so I think they'll have a bounce back here, and I think Washington will win the NFC East. But Stephen, this has been such a pleasure, man. We're an hour and 20 in, but it seems like it flew by. I just love talking about the Nats. You know the Nationals better than most, and always appreciate your insight. And man, this was a lot of fun to talk about where we see the Nats going forward, and maybe we'll see what happens with the Commanders and the baseball season going into the fall. So thank you so much for joining us, man. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
That's Stephen Newman, Virginia Tech graduate, class of 2018, technical writer, a sports writer covering the Nationals for DullasDistrict.com. Check that out for sure. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. This has been the latest edition of the Post with BP. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us. Have a great evening, a great weekend, and we'll see you next time. Love you 3000.